Welcome to another screen share session. I'm really excited about this one. We have two awesome growth leaders from regulated industries. This is a space that when you first hear it, compliance, do you work in growth and have to work with these kind of issues, sounded small to me anyway. Actually, the more we thought about it at Ready Set, the more huge we realized it is. In fact, a huge swath of Ready Set, our clients are in fintech, are in health, hims and hers, etc. So let me introduce our guests, and then we're going to dive straight in. If you are in growth, particularly if you work for a company that has to deal with legal constraints and things like that, there's a lot to learn here, for me included. First, we have Momchil Kyrkchev. Momchil founded LeanPlum. For those of you who have been around long enough, you remember this hot analytics startup back in the day got acquired by CleverTap, where Momchil is now the chief strategy officer. He was a senior software engineer at Google prior to that. So he has been in and around ad tech, analytics, retargeting for a long time. And we have Simon Vishnevsky. Simon is at Credit Genie, leading growth as chief growth officer. And he's been at multiple fintech companies leading growth. He's been at Lyft, Zynga, all kinds of places. Again, for when I say a long time in growth, that's like 8 years. So really happy to have both of you here. Welcome. Now, let's start with you, Simon. Let's start at the top of the funnel. Again, you have a lot of experience working in highly regulated spaces. You've probably had more than one ad rejected before by Facebook or otherwise. I know it's evolved a lot, kind of what creative can say and not say. Talk to us a little bit about some of the difficulties and things you've learned in that area.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. First and foremost, and a few things I want to talk about. First thing is the use of language and how that evolved over time. And what we're seeing right now is the language is moving towards the very specific language that was there for fintech companies in the beginning of the journey, which is get cash in X amount of minutes, get cash in minutes, get up to this amount of money, has evolved now to where there's been few instances of regulators coming down on the companies in the industry, and everyone is making adjustments. And so what that means now is the language is becoming a bit vague, and the language is no more promissory in a way where it claims to give you a specific thing. And I'll give you some examples. In the past, a lot of companies in the space would say get to $100 in minutes, or 5 minutes, or 2 minutes, or 3 minutes, something. And those claims, even though most of the time there is grounds to make those claims, but the regulators don't like it because the experience will be different for different people based on your credit history, based on your transaction history. So now almost all of the companies are gravitating towards language that says fast or quick or anything else. The terms that cannot be quantified. Anything quantifiable is now off the table. That's first thing on the language side.
And is that the general guideline? If I'm making a creative this week for my company in that space or adjacent space, less specific if I can?
Less specificity, yeah. And I think the other thing too is, and this depends on the company, is really the amount of money that is promised by the company has to align with what the majority of the people are able to get. I'll give you a good example. For example, let's say you're coming to a BMW dealership and it says, anyone can come and get a BMW, but when you get there, you ended up getting a Civic because your credit history or your credit score is not good enough to get you a BMW. That's not a good claim, right? So nowadays, what these companies are doing is they're really adjusting the user's expectations for what they're available to them more realistically. It used to be the best case scenario. You can get up to this amount of money. Now, as the industry evolves, everyone is making claims that are a bit more realistic towards majority of the people that are using the services, not just.
Yeah, and while you talk, if you're cool with it, I was just looking at your guys' ads. I can share kind of what you're doing there. Yeah, please go on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, let's see.
Every time I show ads, people are like, oh, these are old. We have better ones now. But anyway, you can see kind of the claims and what you're saying and what you're not.
Yeah, and so, $100 is obviously the hook, and $100 is what most of the people are able to get from the get-go. The average I think the average amount a new user gets is roughly around $95 or close to $100. So factually,
Mhm.
very correct statement. And then also, if you look at the language, it says get to $100 fast. So we're not specifying the amount of time that you're gonna get there, because it's really hard for us to make those claims and predict. And so that's
Also, I noticed I've heard this language up to $100.
up
It doesn't
to
say get
$100. Yeah.
$100.
So we're not saying everyone gets 100. So that's definitely the evolution of the language, where maybe a year ago the ads would have a completely different language, but now everyone has that experience understanding what the industry standards are and what the language should be.
Awesome. Cool. Anything else on the creative tip? I know we're going to talk a lot about this generally that you have learned. Anything that's evolved beyond the language, kind of getting more and more vague? Like, for example, because we've worked in your space, what about the imagery showing shots of cash flying everywhere? Is that still okay?
And that's a very good point, John. I was going to talk about that. That basically all of the companies that are in this space, they're built through UGC ads. Very, I wouldn't say low quality, but very, action packed. And the playbook is certainly very similar across a lot of those companies that are using the same concept. But what you'll notice too, like this year, last year, a lot of those companies, you talked about Albert, Chime, Varo, Moneyline, Dave. Those companies been around for 4+ years now. And so they've been advertising the same style of ads. But then roughly around last year, or maybe even the year before, a lot of them decided to start building more brand-based presence as opposed to a straight acquisition presence. And the reason is that because the TAM is pretty much exhausted, or not exhausted, but a lot of the people that have downloaded the app have already done this. They use the cash advance across multiple apps. So you need to differentiate yourself. And then if you're also pitching your app not as just a cash advance, but as a banking solution, you need to go up market. So that's one thing that you've noticed in this industry is everyone is starting to go up market and have higher production values. No more cash flying around. Maybe a little bit on some digital channels. Maybe TikTok is still there, but across other channels, it's growing up a little bit. So you see less of that, and you see more of polished production, professional actors now. No more people that are, just really some influencer agencies even. So it's starting to become a little bit more polished across the industry.
Well, if you don't want the regulators watching you too close, probably moving from people dancing and throwing cash in the air to professional is a good move. Mom Chill, how about further down the funnel? So now I've acquired users. I want to personalize. I want to send SMS, but that involves a lot of data, a lot of personalization, which can creep people out. Like, how do you operate? Do you guys work with regulated clients that have to worry about this stuff?
Yeah. So we actually have quite a bit. And so we work with, for example, TD Bank in the US, but actually fintech is our second biggest, or financial services, I would say, is our second biggest vertical that we focus on at CleverTap. Globally, actually, 3 of the 5 biggest banks in India, the biggest bank in Kuwait, the biggest bank in Panama and Colombia. It's like all over the world.
Wow.
We have to face this, and it's part of the challenge is also there's a little bit of a difference in regulation around the world that makes it even harder, right? But
before you go on, Mom Chill, tell us, like, how do you summarize in a paragraph specifically what CleverTap does? If I work in growth, I'm on this webinar, like, just for context on you.
Yeah. So we're an all-in-one user engagement platform. And so what does that mean? Basically, when you're done with the acquisition, once you're post-user acquisition, you need to figure out how to onboard the user. You need to figure out how to activate them. You need to figure out how to retain them long-term. And that's usually done through 2 things. On the one side, you have the ability to understand the data behind this user base, right? Who are the various pockets of users in terms of their composition along their life cycle, what are interesting segments or segments that you can personalize better for, and so on. And then on the other end of it is how do you take action across different channels, right? It could be a push notification, it could be an email, an SMS, or an in-app message, all these various touch points. As long as you personalize them based on the actual data, then you can create a better experience. And then the users are most likely to activate better, they're more likely to be retained. You're essentially trying to build a better relationship with the user, by leveraging all the data you have about them, right? And so you're absolutely right. At the core of this is data. And so if you have a highly regulated industry, there's the conflict, in a way, right? Which is you don't want to give up too much data, but the more data you have, the better you can do a good job with personalization, right? And so I think that's kind of the challenge, so to say, in regulated industries. What's interesting is I think fundamentally in our space, because we don't really we only deal with first party data, we don't have the same concerns when it comes to being able to actually use the data properly, right? There's regulations around PII, for example, and then who has access to what data and managing the data. But getting access to the data to begin with is not as much of a concern for us because we're essentially a SaaS platform. So we have we basically just become a data processor, right? You can give us all your first party data and we process it for you. We don't resell the data. We don't give it to a third party. It all sits within your confines. You manage the data.
That does change everything, right? Like, give that example. You gave a great metaphor of like Starbucks versus Phil's with first party and third party. Can you tell that one?
I have a good analogy because I often get the same question everywhere I go. Like if I go to a conference, they always ask me, well, isn't it creepy to personalize, right? And in my mind, I always like the analogy, right? So you walk into a Starbucks, and I have a Starbucks that I go to every Sunday, and they know me so well. They know exactly that I order a latte. They know exactly my first name, even though my first name is a little hard to pronounce, but they figured out how to say it. And so that's super cool, right? They walk in, they already know what I want. That's not creepy. That's called building relationships, right? And then what's creepy though is if let's say I exit and then I go to the Pete's around the corner and they're like, "Hey, Momcho, I know you want your latte. What do here it is for you." I'm like, "How did you get that data? Like, did somebody on the back end from Starbucks talk to the Pete's guy or something?" Like, then you're starting to wonder and you're scratching your head, like, how did this happen? That's when creepiness comes in, right? As long as you build the relationship intentionally and over time, then using data is fine. But then I think where we get in trouble is where you start to see, personalization that you didn't expect, and that's where it gets interesting, right?
Is most personalization out there first party like what you guys are doing? Or I'm guessing you're going to tell me it's a lot of data sharing and we are getting texts that are kind of creepy.
So first party data is, ads a lot of times is not, right? And so that's where I think, it is possible, for example, for you, if you go visit one website and then you're getting retargeted on a different website, that's technically what's happening, right? And the same is true with apps. But purely for what we do, and that's why I try to give that analogy, we only deal with first party data. It means that the only data we have access to is the data you gave to us, right? And that basically makes it so that, we don't, fundamentally, we don't have access to anything else beyond that to be able to personalize based on that, right? That's the difference, essentially.
I got it. So Simon, I know we've talked about the long conversion cycles in fintech, and as Momchil talks about data, talk to us a little bit about optimizing for different events. Post ATT world on iOS, has that affected things? Talk to us about how you look at the whole funnel with something like fintech.
Yeah, definitely. I think, that's the challenge of fintechs is that there is a longer conversion window and people go through a longer funnel to get there. For example, you install the app, most of the fintech apps, how does that work? You install the app, you connect your account, then the app is looking at your activity to determine whether or not you are worthy of, getting the cash amount, cash advance in certain amount. Then the funnel itself is install, sign up, bank connect, and taking the first time cash advance, right? And then it gets even more complicated. If the company is aiming to be a bank, it also wants you to direct deposit with it, and then direct deposits can take up to 12, 14, even 30 days sometimes to validate. So if you're optimizing for an event like direct deposit, that conversion window actually falls outside of optimization window for companies like Meta, for companies like Google and TikTok. So they're just really not efficient optimizing for event. that happens after 7 days. So what are your alternatives? Then you start looking at the events that are maybe less ideal for you to optimize towards, but the ones that happen in large amount. For example, maybe you're not able to do direct deposit, but you're able to do sign up. Is sign up a good prediction of direct deposit? In some instances, yes, it is. But at the same time, you might not be getting people that are direct depositing at a higher clip. So there's always trade-offs there. And so in post-ATT world, it's getting a lot harder because you're not able to attribute all conversions to the channels properly. So what you want to do is you want to add different layers of sanity checks. That's what I call it, validation. So what are some of the things that people do in terms of sanity checks? One thing that proved to be very efficient, and everyone's doing it in the industry, a lot of people, is the survey. So when you install the app opens, and then a certain percentage of your people get this randomized survey that's asking you, what channel did you see the ad that brought you here? And then the beauty of the survey, you can also ask why people are coming to the app, which I think is very important too. Are you coming because you're paying rent? Are you coming because it's food? Are you coming food-related expenses? Is it because you're paying for something else? So very interested in data, and you can clearly see the relationship between, for example, when gas prices went up, we've seen that on the app people were coming in that were specifically getting money for gas around, especially travel season. So very, very direct relationship there. And then last thing is mixed media model, and everyone's striving towards building this in-house. Very few companies have succeeded. What is a mixed media model? It's basically telling you for each single channel, if you spend an X amount of money, how many more conversions are you going to get? So basically, if you're spending, I don't know, $100,000 a month right now, if you were to spend an X $1,000 on top of that, which channel would be more efficient? Where would you need to spend that money? So now you have your attribution, regular attribution, your in-app attribution that says, oh, those users came from Facebook, and then your modal that also predicts where users came from and where it's most efficient to spend money. You have 3 data points. If in one place it says that 17% of your users came from Meta, in the other place it says 19, in the third place it says 21, then you kind of can triage and say, well, you know what, this kind of gives me a good idea about the midpoint of this. And so you build those things, you kind of get to the point where you start getting the results. If you're using just the regular attribution, as probably 70-80% of the companies in space do, then you arrive at points where every single vendor have a different way of attributing their conversions. The MMPs, or mobile attribution partners, are also not very consistent. Some of them accept scans, some of them don't accept scans. So working in that environment gets extremely hard. So my recommendation is really, really build other things and other ways to sanity check your data. Don't just.
I like that. I thought you were going to say proxy metrics, but it is really a sanity check. It's like, and how many companies, like you said, it's the majority that are going off of just attribution or one metric, and some of them will go years and then wake up. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the companies do that because for example, building a survey within the app is fairly easy from the technical standpoint, but building the mixed media model is hard, and it requires people that specifically understand marketing. And if you come from e-commerce, it's going to be a lot harder than if you're coming from like an app-based business, because you just don't have the foundation for understanding.
And you hear mixed things about them, no pun intended, but it's like they're complex. It's 8 years ago now, but soon after I got to Airbnb, I was from mobile, I was in BlueStacks for 5 years before that in this mobile gaming world, and which is always, I felt, ahead of everyone else. And they said, yeah, we're trying to do multi-touch, this and that, but we've spent 1.5 years on it. We're basically giving up. It's too complex. And I think I can say now, a decade later, like I won't say the number, but they were attributing at the time, they're not anymore, like, oh, every user we get from Facebook, the lifetime value is like 1.x. How did we come up with that? We think it's probably true. We don't know. And I'm thinking, oh my God, there's a huge data science group, multiple KPIs for 1 year. And it was too hard for them to make work. You'd think maybe 8 years later, there's more tools out there. It's simpler, but I'm still hearing the same things. One thing about surveys, I think one reason maybe people don't sit with those or focus on those, it sounds too simple. It's like, what do you mean? I'm CMO of this new place. You want me to go put a type form together, or how did you hear about us? But it's really powerful. And a director of marketing on our team said something when he joined that he founded his last company, Works. I tell everyone this. Instead of only having the randomized options, actually, it's interesting when we do this to have no options, and you make them type, or you have optional type in the cells, and you could still, if you're getting thousands, maybe it doesn't work. But if like us, you're getting hundreds, you can just scan through them and get, or have someone put them, have ChatGPT arrange them by number. But the things people say when you give them the opportunity to, and 1 out of 8 people will write like a paragraph, you learn so much more. So I'm a big fan of those surveys, and I find they're very accurate when we check them against other sanity metrics.
I was just going to say, you struck something there, John, about ChatGPT, because to me, this textual data is such a treasure trove for language models, right? This has been one of the biggest innovations in tech in the last couple of years. And this is actually true for us. Like, Simon, you're absolutely spot on with surveys. We've actually seen a very big uptick on surveys in our platform also, especially integrated with your CRM capabilities, because that way you can directly ask questions. The classic will be like quick NPS with a follow-up question or multiple questions, and then building out dashboards that are on a per user level, and then building out understanding through ChatGPT, what are the interesting trends, like a cloud of words, or like key takeaways, and all this stuff is super interesting. I also wanted to mention one thing on ATT, which is we've kind of been stuck in this opt-in world for a long time on the CRM side, because push notifications for a very long time have been opt-in, right? I think with ATT, the rest of the world caught up with ads, but there's a lot of different ways you can actually optimize. And so one of the interesting things one of our gaming customers did, non-regulated, but kind of applies everywhere, is the prompts to ask for permission, right? And so you can kind of ask multiple times the ATT prompt, because otherwise you end up getting one shot. But you can ask them, and you can explain to them why it's a good idea to do that, right? Please support us, through advertising. We kind of pay the bill, whatever it is. You can kind of try A/B test different points in the app where you can ask for this prompt, and that way, we've actually seen, like a double-digit increase percentage-wise for the opt-ins for ATT. Just like we've seen the same play out for push notifications. You can also explain to people why they need push notifications. Like, in a classic example is like, do you want to get notification if your Uber car is waiting outside, right? You probably do, right? So as long as you give the right context, people are more likely to opt in. So that also impacts things. So it's not a given anymore. You have to fight for it, but there's all these various things, like be it surveys or be it better opt-in rates through optimization, that you have to do to get the data you need to do a better job, ultimately as a marketer.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. By the way, I just saw this recently, and I just found it just in time, which is the opt-in rates, maybe because of smart people like you. Oh, go away, ad. Oh, come on. Anyway, finding ways to A/B test, but the opt-in rates, as of Q1 2024, there's a noticeable increase in user opt-in rates. 51% of gaming app users, 46% consenting to tracking.
Right.
I mean, I remember when this thing first came out, the numbers were like more like 10%, 15% opting in, and now it's half.
Yep.
And I didn't.
This is in line with.
I didn't know you could actually say, "Hey, you're about to get this pop-up. It would really help us make a better experience if you said yes." So that's interesting to know.
Yeah, it's all about context and personalization ultimately, and we saw the same in push notifications. By the way, I think the average is like around 40% opt-in, so I'm not surprised. But it also started pretty low, and then people figured out ways in a clever way to ask, and maybe ask multiple times contextually, so that you can actually increase your opt-in rates with push notifications. So it kind of directly applies everywhere.
That's very high leverage, I think, for everybody. Mamchil, you mentioned AI briefly. I want to do this a little backwards. I live every day with working on airpost.ai, bringing AI to make creatives. And probably Simon and I could talk all day, and we will, about AI and creative and the dangers and pitfalls with banking and fintech and with that, and the exciting opportunities. But what you don't hear a lot about is AI when it comes to messaging and decisioning. Take us through a little bit about what you're seeing in your world there.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen real quick, guys, just to show. I think most of the classic AI when it comes to content has to do with text and image generation, essentially the creative side. And this is like a standard journey that you would typically build out. Essentially, if you go in, we have the integration with ChatGPT, so you can put in like, get 20% off on your next
And this is why you
purchase.
do this. This is like an SMS, like we all get sometimes, saying, "Hey, you
Yeah,
haven't
like
ordered
a
from us
push
in a
notification in
while."
this
Yeah.
case. Yeah. So, and then you can have it essentially generate multiple alternatives for you. Of course, it would put in emojis, you can put in different things, and it would basically give you options, right? So, and then all you do is just copy this, put it back in, and you're good to go. What's interesting though here, and where it starts to get tricky is, well, one, the biggest challenge with these is that you want to be able to sound like your brand, right? If you're a bank, you probably don't want to sound very excited, or maybe that's something you want to try, right? But there's a lot of different things you can optimize for, right? For example, you can optimize for emotions. And so you can see every one of these notifications on the bottom actually has an emotional score. These are the 5 core emotions: anticipation, FOMO, joy, trust, and so on. So for a bank, maybe you want to optimize for trust. And then here you go. I just optimize, and this is basically, what a message would sound like if it's more trust-based. Or if I just want to, focus on FOMO, then I go with that, right?
Is this
Where
your?
this gets,
I love frameworks. Is this the Ocean framework you had mentioned?
yes, yeah, that's right. The 5 core emotions of Ocean. Yeah. So this is all baked in. Where it gets also interesting is if you want to marry your typical language into this, you can actually feed it, or the system already has all the historical notifications you've been sending, obviously the ones that are working well for you. So it develops an understanding of the tone of voice that you use, the language that you use, and that becomes part of the prompt. This is something that we're actually working on to be able to optimize. So not only do you optimize for emotions, but you can also contextually sound like your brand in terms of tone of voice, right?
Is this
Uh,
world one? Because I know what you're describing and showing right now, and thank you for sharing this.
yeah.
Definitely uh, allows for this. Is volume a thing in your space, Momchil? Like if you're advising someone on this webinar who's got, yeah, I had to do a follow up 2 days after their order, saying, "How are you liking it? Get 10% off on your next one." Should they only be running one thing that they think works, or two, or 200?
So I'm actually, it's a very interesting question, because the question of volume comes up quite a lot, and especially in the context of caps, frequency caps. I think really the art of CRM and the science behind it is really to be able to understand the tipping point. Because if you just look at it on one end, if you're just sending a push notification every hour, you're going to spam the users. They're not going to be excited, right? On the other end, if you never send a push notification, you're not getting the most out of it, out of your system, right? So there's going to be some middle ground somewhere where you're going to be able to send the optimal amount of messaging that is also yielding the best results possible. I think really it boils down to personalization, and so understanding the various pockets of users you have, where they sit in their life cycle, and then finding the tipping point for messaging. That's really where I think majority of CRM tends to focus on, right? That tipping point is going to be, it's not too much, it's not too little, it's just enough to be able to achieve the goals around lifetime value, around retention, in an optimal way, right? And that requires a lot of experimentation, actually.
Experimentation and intelligence. I assume this is a bridge too far for 2024, but has AI had a role yet in the back end of companies like yours in
Yeah,
decisioning and like when?
yeah. So I'll show you another interesting kind of um, look into
Yes.
this, right? So this is basically, we just talked about creative, right? So this is all fine. You can do you can do creative, and you can also do this in ChatGPT directly. But what if you want to send, maybe I'll try it, like push notifications versus an email, right? Just a classic example. One thing that we do is this concept of IntelliNode, where you can basically go in and set up multiple paths, and then for each of the paths, you basically have the ability for the machine to learn which path is most optimal. So what you do is you set up a goal. Let's say you were trying to optimize for conversions, right? Or for even app launch, right? Or a very basic engagement. And then the system will start at a 50-50 split, and then would automatically start to route on a per user basis people, depending on who is most likely to convert on which of the two paths, right? So you can imagine this could be a channel, push versus email, or we can try frequency, 1 push versus 2 push, or we can even try those 5 core emotions, right? I can have one for fear of missing out, I have one for trust, and then
Mhm.
the system will learn people's preferences over time. This is just kind of basic. I would call this like pre-gen AI intelligence routing, because it is based on multi-arm bandits. This is an IntelliNode essentially, but the idea here is like it basically just does this based on actual algorithms, predictive algorithms that have been around for many, many years. I
So
think
it's
what
machine
you're
learning.
alluding,
It's not necessarily Gen AI. Yeah.
it's
And
not
by the
Gen
way,
AI,
you have
it's a
to. It's too
predictive.
cool a term, a multi-arm bandit. You have to tell us what it means.
Yeah, multi-arm banded. The idea is, by the way, this was the last thing I built in Google as an engineer. So, like 12 years ago. So I go way back. But the idea is you start with, it's got two modes, right? Explore and exploit. And the idea is like in explore mode, you're randomly sending the people down the two paths. And then the system will start to notice patterns. For example, it notices that people in the US who do X, Y, and Z are more likely to convert on path A, but people in Canada are more likely to convert on path, B or C or whatever. And then the exploit part, well, the 90% of it is where it starts to really focus on sending people down the path that are more likely to convert on, right? So the machine starts to learn over
Hmm.
time, and that way you get the most optimal outcome, but you're not losing on the ability to keep exploring because maybe people change over time, or maybe
Right.
new things get learned over time, right? So you have a little bit of a pocket of exploration, but the exploit part is where you are sending in a most optimal way people down the most predicted path, right? It's a
I'm going
classic
to bring
algorithm.
that. That's genius. I'm going to bring that term to Ready Set. I'd heard it batted around out there. It's cool that you were a part of it originally. We actually coincidentally test ads for our clients that we produce in terms of explore versus exploit.
Yeah.
It started as pretty basic, and where we've gone with it anyway, we call the creative genome, which is like all the different types of audiences cut by all the different types of concepts cut by why 30 somethings are going crazy for, why 40 somethings are going crazy for, different hooks. Like there's so many variables, so many multi-arms. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of a classic algorithm, right? In many ways. I think what you alluded to though is Gen AI, and I personally think when you look at large language models, of course they can generate text, of course they can generate images, but really what we're building here is an artificial intelligence, which is general in purpose, right? So you're building intelligence, and so can you use that intelligence to route the messaging and the actual core logic of your journeys, not with predictive models like I just showed you, but with actual LLMs that are plugged in directly into the routing logic, right? That to me is really the holy grail.
I picture it
Um,
like, then I want to go to you, Simon, on Gen AI and creative. I picture it like an agent, essentially.
in a way,
They say that the agents today, the LLMs today, it's kind of like a well-educated intern who sort of can do what you tell them. And having an intern sitting at that juncture and being thoughtful about what to do versus predictive, sort of rote models, I think is really exciting as well. Simon, in working in fintech so much, have you experimented with Gen AI? I'm a big AI bull and optimist and building a whole creative product for it. And I'm a bit jaded because I think I'm coming up on 10 times now. I've seen people in the D2C Facebook ad, Twitterati post, oh man, I put an AI ad out there and it's crushing it. And I always politely ask, that's so cool. Can you please link us to it? And no one's ever responded. So have you made any ads with AI yet? Where do you see things going? And how do you think about this in such a constrained space?
Yeah, there's now a few vendors that are coming out that have the ability to iterate on some of your ads, which is what AI is at the moment, right? It's just for feeding the data, feeding the video, feeding some of the data, and then getting iterations of that. It's not really true AI in terms of maybe a platform itself creating multiple ads for you. It's just really like at the end of the day, the creator is the person that's either in house or an agency, and then what AI does, it shifts those and makes those ads based on some of the criteria, some of the inputs that you put in there.
Can you name names? And I'll show sites while you talk because I'm sure others are wondering, where can I get this gen iterations?
Right now, I mean, there's, I mean, I know it's the same thing, but it's actually, there are vendors that we're working with right now. They just don't want to be named.
Okay, that's fine. I had to ask.
People are staying, but it's not very advanced yet. Even the ads themselves, they don't look amazing yet. So I'm bullish on the quality of this. One thing that I am a little bit apprehensive is that, generally speaking, if there's going to be some data sharing on those platforms and they're going to figure out what concepts are working, then everyone else will be starting to do iterations of the same thing. So in theory, right, like the idea behind Gen AI is driving the click-through rate, the conversion rate. Like in theory, right? Like if you make the best possible ads for best possible audience, what it's going to do across the industry, it's going to start driving the total click-through rates up and engagement up, right? Like that's what it should do, the good Gen AI. Now the question becomes, if there's only 3, 4, 5, or 6 ads that are performing really well across the industry, and everyone else start making the exact same ads and iteration of those ads, like what's going to happen? Is it really going to drive click-through rates up for everyone and conversion rates?
Isn't that where we are now without AI though? It's like we've worked with many companies that have, get $250, get $100 today. And believe me, we've done thousands of ads for all of them. And it all comes back to the same answer. Nothing beats get cash today fast.
Right. And that's exactly the point, right? Like as humans, we already are AIs in a way, right? So we're evaluating that, and
we're eyes, yeah.
We're trying to emulate and replicate things that work, and so AI just gives you ability to do it at a much larger scale. So to a degree, I mean, John, I think you're right. We're already doing this, and it's proving to be effective, right? Everyone looks at what works across other advertisers, and we copy it. And even though ads all looking very much the same, they end up performing really well. So in that regard, it's already a proven concept. So AI is just going to let you do it faster, and then AI is going to let you do it in a more diverse way, which is different settings, different backgrounds, different actors. You can target people based on what works for them specifically. So I agree, it's good to be bullish on that, but it's also something to keep in perspective. Is that
I think the dream, right, Simon, is that that AI will get beyond human intelligent in our career time and start coming up with those big swing ideas that every growth leader wants. But thinking about it out loud with you, it's like, for that to happen, humans should be coming up with those now. And that's what we do. I mean, that's the point. But the tools that you're seeing, without naming names, that's fine. You mentioned iterations. You mentioned the quality is not quite there. Paint a picture for us of what you are seeing there. Because there's a lot of people listening to this that are like, my boss doesn't, CEO keeps asking, are we using AI? I saw a thing. I saw a demo. I saw a new startup. What literally are you seeing out there today? What are they trying to do? And what is it ending up looking like?
Yeah, so basically, you go to the platform, you upload some of your creatives, and then what the output is the output. You give them the script, you give them your original creative, and that creative gets posted in like 10 or 12 or 15 different iterations with different actors reading the same script, and they're kind of put in the same environment. Sometimes the background changes, sometimes something else changes, but they're basically reading off of your script with different emotions, with different speed, with different level of engagement.
Is this the section of Gen AI in our space right now I call people staring at the camera reading lip syncing? Yes. So I'm aware of this. Okay, and then you have them say it with different iterations, but my personal peccadillo is it's not a good performance ad if it's someone staring straight ahead and talking. Usually they don't have the product. Usually you're not seeing how it works. Usually you don't get the feel for, the unboxing, okay, it comes to my house, or all the app screens in the right place. That might come, but anyway, that's... Yeah. I'm rooting for everyone, but I know exactly what you're talking about, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's definitely, and that's one of the barriers to entry, is just the sophistication level is fairly low. It's going to take a while to figure out and kind of crack that. And like, is this really going to be just an ability of building 15 or 18 different or 20 different iterations of the same ad, or is it actually going to be more of like taking the concept and doing something with that that's a bit outside of just kind of like adding those small pieces on top of it? This is going to be a total overhaul. Like, this is what I want to do, and then it throws out 5 or 6 different concepts for you, as opposed to 5 or 6 different iterations for you. So far, I haven't seen the concepts. I've seen the iterations. That's why I'm like, all right, this is useful for now, but it's just useful in producing things in numbers, and maybe like just production costs go down because you're able to feed it in there. But in terms of relying for it for like directionally, or for brand, or for, I don't know, for like your 2025 concepts that you want to test, that's not what AI is doing yet. It's just really
not yet. That's too juicy a segue. I'm not going to be pitchy because we aren't, and that's not what these are about. And actually, if you're at a pretty big company, you should not use our products anyway. So, but it's really funny how you just said that, because I'm at an offsite right now for our brand AirPost, And literally what we're trying to do, so these are all made with AI with no people in the machine. In fact, many of the shots, like this shot, this is like a vegan egg thing. This shot, all of the shots, except for like she's real, are made with AI. But mostly it's not creepy staring at the camera lip syncy stuff. It's and there's voiceovers on some of these and stuff like that. But as you can see, it's different concepts. It's
Right.
I think of ads as like ideation, production, post-production. We're trying to kind of solve for all of them. Some have end cards, some don't. So listen, we're getting better every 2 months. It's amazing. If you saw our ads from 2 months ago, they're really terrible. These are less terrible, and they're just getting better and better and better. I just spent 3 hours actually in a jam, like brainstorming and testing on Runway and some other tools and APIs, how to make these better and better. But hopefully this is where we're going, which is here are the concepts, 3 reasons why, and fill, we call paint by numbers, fill in the blanks. So anyway, it's a really exciting time, and I'm really curious where it will go.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like it's really interesting to me, and you're absolutely right, Simon. I see this actually in a lot of industries right now, is that people are just looking at AI right now to reduce costs, right? And that, but fundamentally, it's like we're not really using AI for decisioning and for intelligence yet, I think, at scale, right? That's fundamentally the holy grail. And it's interesting because if you look at some of the largest AI labs in the world, their metric is actually to reduce the cost of intelligence. But that's what they actually strive to do. And we're going to continue to be on this path where there's 4 or 5 major labs working very aggressively, very competitively with each other. I was just reading this article yesterday from Jensen from NVIDIA, and he was saying how Moore's law, I think, you double every 18 months. We're talking like, 20x every 18 months here, right? If you look at the cost of tokens and some of the, core, basically metrics that are coming out of OpenAI and Gemini and everybody kind of competing. So question is, can we get to a place where humans, it's not possible to scale to that kind of level, right? So because, if you look at our space, like in CRM, fundamentally what we do is rule-based, right? So yeah, for everybody who's onboarding right now, or everybody who's dropped off in the last month, we're going to send them a special gift or a special offer and try to re-engage them, win them back. But there's going to be a segment of thousands of users still that fit that, micro segment. Even if you're very good at segmentation, you have a whole team of CRM managers, you're still talking thousands of people. What if your segment is 1, right?
Yeah.
You will never be able to hire 1,000 CRM managers to do that kind of thing, right? It's just not feasible, right? Nobody has that kind of scale. And that's where it gets super interesting, I think.
Speaking of using AI for decisioning and a personalization of one, I wonder what you guys think about what the platforms are doing. So Momchil, you were at Google, right? You've worked trying to optimize Facebook and other platforms, Simon, every day for many years. Do you guys feel that they are watching these clips with AI? Do you feel that when, Simon, you put together 5 different hooks or use those iterations and throw a bunch of things into an ad set, that a priori of the thing running, it's like, push this one, not that one? You know what I mean? Or do you think it's just old school? Anyone?
Well, I think they're starting to, I think the platforms now are pretty aware of this. So what they're trying to push is they're trying to push quality of ads. They always have. So they have quality scores. Like even back in the day, like Meta had quality scores for your ads, right? That was one of the criteria that was pushed in order for you. Like there was CPMs and then there was a quality score, right? I'm not sure it went away. I'm sure it's somewhere in the black box still. I'm sure that, both TikTok and Google and other platforms are looking at the quality scores as well. And so I think I'm going to be very curious as to how they're going to judge some of those iterative ads and figuring out whether or not those are original, those are iterative, what is the value that those are bringing, are those just kind of the iterations mindless? So I think the other thing too is the total number of ads. And that's a very interesting question too, right? Like if you are 10xing and 20xing the number of ads that are going in the system now. Like people used to test. I remember the days when people used to have a batch of 3 creatives for a 10,000 a day budget, and that was their testing. No one does that anymore. Now people are dumping, with AI, people are dumping 50 or 100 in there. And so I think eventually the platforms themselves would probably start using AI to weed out some of those creatives, because you just cannot have, it's just the strain on the system to have this many creatives going in the system.
Especially if you don't have a huge budget. And it's interesting you mentioned the volume. We had Eric Seufert on a screen share, and he believes vehemently that we're moving to a place where you ought, if the cost of creative goes low, especially a multifaceted different video creative and everything creative, then you ought to be running hundreds of things and letting it, just giving it to the algorithm. And if it spends 17 cents on something, fine. My feeling of why people aren't fine with that today is because they just spent 3 weeks giving revisions to their agency on that ad, and they need to see it emotionally, at least spend $1,000 or 10,000. I think that world might be changing. I still feel that this thing that we're describing now is like obvious. You'd be surprised. We have a lot of clients that still don't want to test more than 10 things a month that are spending millions of dollars. But theoretically, it should move to where you're describing, Simon, particularly with Gen AI taking over. How about you, Momchil? What do you think?
So Google, because I have a lot of that experience, it was interesting because in the early days, there was this battle internally between should we use AI or not, right? And I feel like there was 2 different camps, like the search camp. For the longest time, it was, no, it's going to be just a lot of quality search improvements, and it's going to be hand engineered and very, very specific, and we're going to hire 1,000 of the smartest engineers in the world, and they'll figure it out. The ads world was more amenable to ads, and it was more focused on predicting CTRs and then building these models, making them live in real time, and so on, right? But that's kind of the classical approach to, basically just using supervised learning, essentially building models and kind of doing that. I think what's happened is with LLMs, with the industry kind of pushing Google to open up and to be competitive in the Gen AI age, they're going to be forced to get more and more of the ads engine to run on Gemini, right? And they don't really talk about this right now, but I'm pretty sure they're thinking about it, and it's going to be very, very tricky for them because that's their moneymaker. And moving an 800-pound gorilla forward into a new realm is very hard, and they're going to be very slow. So the question is, can they do this? Can they essentially transition themselves on their own, or are they going to need a forcing function from the outside and then, create a code red internally and basically get onto that, right?
Let me make sure I'm reading you right. So sticking with that forcing function from the outside. So, I mean, I'm not the normal user. I'm in Silicon Valley. I'm like obsessed with AI for years, but I now am fully off of Google, not by any principle, or I love Google, but I really haven't done a search, maybe 2 in the last few months. I use, especially since the search feature, the little globe lit up on the bottom of ChatGPT, every day. If I need to, I want a new T-shirt from somebody I haven't heard of. Any search, I'm using OpenAI, and it's even showing. I can say show photos, link to the T-shirt, whatever, make a purchase. That would be. I assume that's what you mean by forcing function from the outside. And what you're talking about is if AI is the new way to search and get through all of the ad-laden cocktail recipes and crap, then Google's in trouble. I think you're muted.
Yep. So I was just going to say that to me, Google's definitely being pushed to innovate. I don't think Google is as much of a trouble as everybody else would love them to be. This is just the top charts in the App Store right now. You can see, obviously, ChatGPT is the #2 app right now in the US charts, but Gemini is #5 and Google's #6, right? So they're not going to give up. They're going to have they're going to put up a fight. In fact, Gemini just claimed the #1 spot for LLMs a couple of days ago, right, beating ChatGPT.
Gemini is fantastic, but even if everyone in the world has it, Momchil, I guess when I saying in trouble, are you describing like if people are using Gemini to search instead of a cell to search?
Google will have to figure out how to advertise in the Gemini world, and that's going to be the most disruptive reason why Google's the inventor of the LLM guys, right? They literally wrote the paper. Like at one point, 60 to 80% of every researcher in the world that was focused on LLMs worked at Google Labs, but somehow OpenAI beat them to it. And the reason Google never published this throughout the rest of the world is because it was disruptive to their own business, right? They had to get a forcing function from the outside to really push them into this world. And I think that's going to happen the same way for ads.
Yeah.
Google will have to figure out, OpenAI will have to figure out, how do you monetize, how do you advertise in a world where you don't search for a bunch of links.
What about for advertisers jumping to the degree you guys are involved with search or SEO or just conversations within your companies? What are people saying as AI search rises? Or you can touch on AI, descriptions of things being written for you in Facebook, et cetera. But as this happens, guys, as an advertiser, let's start with you, Simon. Is this a point of conversation internally? How are you dealing with this?
Yeah, I think this is a point of conversation. And I think, to be completely frank, no one knows yet what are the right ways of leveraging this. Like, what are we looking at? Keywords? What are we looking at in terms of optimizing it to the new realm of people looking for search in the AI world? So I think that's another thing that we probably would need to bring someone to chat about. Like, sooner or later, those are going to start appearing. But so far, I think it's been so quick. Like, it's been only really like half a year since it became prominent, right? Like Gemini, I don't even know, like what, 3-4 months since it's been coming up. And then I think in June, the search on OpenAI opened as well. So it's really hard. Like, there's really not a ton of information. It reminds me a little bit of when ATT came out, right? And everyone was there was like so many conflicting opinions. So to be honest with you, there's no playbook yet. And I don't know what the playbook entails. Is this the same way? It's just really business as usual. Is there something else? Do you counter that with, I don't know, your website content being created by AI that's going to optimize for the specific search terms or like for techniques? And no one really knows what the black box is, right? Like, you never really knew it for, well, you kind of actually had an idea of what Google's looking for in terms of like search keywords and then backlinking, all the SEO and SEM stuff as well. But right now it's really hard to understand or really get a feel for what we need to do in order to appease this new machine that's going to be sending people our way, basically.
Yeah, I think you're right. How about you, Momchil? Is it a discussion there? You guys, I'm sure, want to be showing up in searches for retargeting and things like that.
So for us, it's a little bit more far removed. I think it's going to impact the UA world a lot more, to be honest. But obviously, we're impacted in the way that apps monetize through ads, and then we do the retargeting. So we're plugged into all the major platforms. We have Facebook, we have Google for retargeting. We just launched TikTok as well, and so being able to kind of be everywhere and being able to orchestrate essentially retargeting as part of your overall journey is just one more channel essentially in our arsenal to be able to drive engagement, right? That's kind of how we look at it through our lens.
One more piece on AI, starting with you, Simon. Do you find that the discussions internally there, as you're playing with these Gen AI tools, as Facebook injects AI descriptions to your ads, as you all use ChatGPT internally? I have friends at big companies that say, yeah, we're not allowed to touch ChatGPT at all, just for any searches. What is that conversation like in a fintech like yours? And then I would love to hear the same from Momchil. I know you're dealing with a lot of big banks.
Yeah, I think, we've touched about it, and I think Momchil was talking about it as well, is that a lot of it is centered around cost cutting. Like, I think it's a bit of like kind of an I don't know. It's a bit unfortunate to me that like it's not being brought in terms of performance optimization and thing, but more in terms of just like, how do we make things efficient to where we don't need as many copywriters, or we don't need to make those creatives in-house. And I don't know if it's the right approach, because at the end of the day, let's just say you're operating with $70 million budget, right? And you have a team that's like $5 million. You can cut $1 million or $2 million with AI tools from your production costs, from your overhead costs. But isn't it the goal to go from 70 million and spend to like, I don't know, 140 efficiently? And the impact of that far, trumps like anything that you can do in terms of savings internally. And so for me, that's one thing where I'm pushing a little bit towards the latter, which is like, how can we actually leverage this to improve performance, as opposed to how can we actually leverage this to reduce the headcount? And so,
but it sounds like the premise, I hear that the premise is a green light. Like, you guys are not Bank of America yet, so you can use AI all you want. It sounds like. Momchil, how about you? Like, do you have conversations with these companies that are like, no, make sure you're not doing any AI because we don't want
A
lawsuits?
lot, especially when you get into procurement, and then they see what you have like an AI thing. Give me all the documentation. I want to make sure my data doesn't get sent over. Like it just becomes like this endless cycle, back and forth, back and forth. I see Simon smiling, but I'll tell you one thing: I would have never thought to see startups in legal tech. For the longest time, since the dot-com era, that was the one area where nobody could launch a startup, like in
Yeah.
legal. Now I see AI startups in legal tech. To me, this tells me that this technology is so disruptive that even the most conservative of companies out there are opening up to it because they see the potential. So that's my take. I think obviously regulated industry is going to be more careful, but even they're going to get pulled into this because it's a giant tsunami that's really taken over our tech world in many ways. And I'm here to get excited and be part of it as much as I can.
I'm totally here for it. What was that? I don't know if people are still allowed to talk about Travis's law or whatever. It was like Uber's going to become so ubiquitous you can't not use it. That's the goal, and don't worry about all this regulation. It's kind of like that. Because I'll be honest, I have a friend who has a legal startup, and maybe he's naive, but he's not too worried about the other guys that are using like Gen AI. Because most law firms he's been talking to, he's been doing this like 6 years, and he uses machine learning, but not like Gen AI. Are like, we can't touch that. I was just with a friend from Kansas City. She's a partner at a 200-person Kansas City firm. They're not allowed to use ChatGPT internally. So my guess is all these shiny legal startups are raising lots of money. They're all betting on Travis's law, but it still will take time for those guys to come around because they don't want to get sued.
Yep.
Anything we didn't talk about, guys? Anything you didn't get a chance to share yet on kind of growth, retention within regulated spaces that might be valuable for folks?
I would say maybe one area which is probably more of the boring, so to say, quote unquote, area is when it comes to regulated industries, data management is probably where we spend the majority of time kind of discussing. And there's a lot of different facets to it, right? There's how do you store the data for PII purposes? Do you mask the data? Who has access to this data, right? Maybe only a few people have the ability to see the unmasked version of it. You can still use it for personalization, but you don't actually get to see it. The next layer of this is tokenization. You don't even store the data on the platform. You just store a token of the data, and then the bank or whoever can basically resolve to the actual piece of data. And then all these various layers of role-based permissions and like whitelisting, like it becomes like a very long process. It's a very important process because in regulated industries, how you manage the data and what kind of security and protections you allow for is really half the battle. To be able
What
to
kinds of
unlock the value.
tools, like if I was just going to say, if you're a small growing fintech, which is why I'm going to ask you how you guys are dealing with this exact thing in a second, Simon, what tools do you see out there that people can, this is all very intimidating sounding to me. If I was thrust into Credit Genie, I'd be like, I don't know how to do the things Mom Jill just said, but they sound really important. And maybe it's not the growth lead's job anyway, but like, if I want to implement those things or go back to my work on tomorrow and make sure they're done right, what tools are people using to implement that? Mom Jill.
Oh, that's for me. I mean, we do these things ourselves for the problems that we're solving, which is CRM engagement. So we basically, our data layer, essentially the data management layer, has already all the baked-in enterprise quote unquote features that enable data masking, tokenization, all that stuff, right? So all I was saying is, like, as part of the whole process of us working with fintech and financial services is this whole process of actually understanding how to manage data and how to secure the data in a very, clever way, right? But yeah, this is, I would say, like, this is table stakes at this point for us to work in these regulated industries, especially for the larger players.
How about you, Simon? Are you guys thinking about this? What tools do you guys use?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty broad in terms of just like data security. I think Momshel probably covered that a little bit more. In terms of, we've talked about legal stuff as well, right? There's a rise in legal tech that we are considering using just because it's a lot more efficient. And to be honest with you, a lot of legal tech AI tools that are out there now are even more efficient than it's actually an add-on to the legal team. I've talked to them about that internally, right? Like they're getting access to something that ultimately they can control and they can edit and they can use or not use. But in a lot of instances, it's actually very like it's an add-on and a value add for them. So I think like, we can talk about some specific tools, but if you look across the functions of the team, even in the regulated environment, you'll find that some of those different functions that are out there now that are all driven by AI are being already used by the teams internally, so they're being leveraged. Our legal team,
it feels very top heavy. It feels like when I pull our company or other companies, it's right now it's ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. It's the large models, and then a bunch of startups that people are testing, like what you mentioned. For our sake, one of our operations people 6 months ago, she built a custom GPT that's trained on all of our contracts with our clients for 3 years and knows what we care about, what we don't care about. And it's not perfect, but anytime we get a red line from a client, we feed it into that and say, what is non-standard here? What considerations should we have? And it's really amazing at highlighting those kinds of things. And it's faster than any lawyer, right?
Directories, like a lot of internal directories are now built on ChatGPT, and then the other things that are getting built now is contextual things, right? Because for example, you can let's just say, I'll give you a good example. Let's just say you are thinking about a product feature, or maybe a product feature that like launched or maybe got stuck in development. Now the companies are building internal chat GPTs where you can search for those things and it's going to give you context. And that's actually really brilliant. I think that's an amazing development, to where, like, for example, John, you could be like, have we ever done this type of creative for this company? And you just type it in your own internal chat GPT, and it's like, oh, we actually have some Trello tickets opened again, and this was the owner, and this is where it kind of got like dropped off maybe. And you're like, maybe we should look at it again. And that is a chat GPT used for internal company use.
That is a genius use case, and it's a real application. I've only worked at one big company, but at Airbnb, the cliche was someone would go up to Brian, she's CEO, and say, hey, have we thought about giving points to get, have we thought about, and 99 times out of 100, he'd smile. Yes, in 2014, we tried it for 2 quarters, or we halfway, like everything is not about ideas, it's about making it happen and having a repository of what work was done, where were we, what did we learn? Yeah. That went away with the guy who left in 2017, it's like, let it come back. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you both very much. This was super fun for me. I learned a lot. And if you're out there and you're in a regulated space and you're getting ads rejected and you're freaked by AI, like, we're all in the boat with you. So don't worry. I also think it's a really bright future. And I think the space is a lot of fun. So thank you both for joining today.
Awesome. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Cheers. Bye, guys.